Really, the most beautiful thing, I think, in all of painting, and in my opinion, is the fact that we can conjure up through a series of abstract shapes, through a series of, basic rectangles, trapezoids, all kinds of strange angles and things. We can conjure up something that represents the beauty and harmony in nature. This one painting is focused on that very idea. So let's go ahead and get ready to tone this canvas. Alright, so I'm going to set the palette down. So again, I'm going to be showing you how I go about approaching these paintings. So I'm going to just use a little bit of mineral spirits, okay, and a microfiber cloth. I've been using the same cloth to tone these surfaces, so this cloth is going to be a little bit rough. So ideally, I would recommend that you use gloves, but as you see here, I'm not really touching the part that has the mineral spirits, so I'm pretty sure I'll be fine. So mineral spirits and burnt umber oil paint. Now that I have all of it covered with the using the microfiber cloth. The reason I like to use the microfiber cloth over like paper towel or something like that is that the microfiber cloth doesn't really fall apart as much as paper towel. So the next thing I'll do is with a clean and dry bristle brush, just get some of the paint onto this brush, okay? And I'm going to use this as a sort of eraser brush, okay? So I actually like to use this little palette cup to clip my paper towel onto the palette. So I'm gonna now switch into drawing brush and eraser brush technique. So as you know, that I tend to refer to that as the umber sketch. Alright, so here's an image of the pose, okay? So I will have the photo reference throughout some of the shots, probably not every single shot, just because, again, it's going to be kind of difficult between different camera angles. I'm going to be moving the same camera. But in any case, so I'm going to use just a little bit of odorless mineral spirits onto this brush. I'm just using a tiny little round synthetic brush for my drawing brush. So for today, I think what I'm going to do is focus primarily on the placement of the entire figure and the still life objects, okay? So with a few simple straight lines and angles, I'm going to get an idea of the entire picture, okay? So again, this is not necessarily how, this isn't a how-to kind of video, okay? This is a how I am going to go about approaching this painting, and I've been using this same approach pretty much for the majority of my studio paintings. So right now I have the top of the head, the bottom of the arm, I have the table kind of gestured in there, kind of sketched in there. So I'm just using a simple little envelope really to place every one of these shapes. And I'm working kind of loosely, I'm keeping myself at about an arm's length, or in this case probably a little bit more than an arm's length away. Now when you go about subdividing your shapes into more exacting shapes, the most important thing to do, I think, is to keep things as simple as possible. So rather than jump right into the features, I'm actually going to be putting in the outside shape. So I'm going to be using something I tend to call the envelope to get an idea of the outside shape before getting hung up on any of the smaller details. Now you see we've put in a much more simplified, almost egg-like shape for the outside perimeter of the face. You'll actually see later on in the footage that I will place in the block in for the face and erase it and then place it back in and then erase it a couple times. So that's going to be something kind of interesting to watch. But as you can see, you can think of a curve as something that is constructed of a series of straight lines, and what this does is it really gives you much more clarity with your mark making. Now, with a composition as complicated as this one, I wouldn't say it's terribly complicated, but it does involve the human figure. So I never really talked too much about, figure drawing or anything like that, just because this channel is mainly consisted of head and shoulders. So we had the Steve painting, and we've had a few paintings where you got to see at least down to the knees. So even though the model is wearing this outfit, I still want to think about the construction of the human figure as if it were a figure drawing or a figure painting. I won't go into too many specifics about figure drawing. I'll just talk about how it relates to this particular pose. So I have a little slight angle as the model's head. Her chin is raised a little bit. I have the shoulder one kind of turned this way, so it adds a little bit of grace to the pose. So when you're posing a model for a painting, try to have some kind of variations within the pose. So the head is turned this way, the shoulders are slightly turned like this. The arms are kind of not in too drastic of a angle, but we see here the center line of the torso is going back. You can tell that the model is leaning back, and then there's a little bit of twist with the legs, but the main thing really is to keep these shapes incredibly simple and to stand back as often as possible and be objective as possible. So the magic happens when it's just a few lines and then you jump in with color, as you'll see later, and then you're able to convey the illusion of form very, very easily. So now the next thing really is the head. This subdivision of the forms on the face are quite complicated to do from the beginning. So if you start off with the features of the face, I think it's just much more difficult that way. So that's why I started off with the outside shape. Notice I made a little indication there for the center line. I had the center line a little bit off before, so you're going to see me wipe off the center line. So the reason I'm talking to you now in voiceover mode as opposed to the original audio in this clip is so that I can give you a much more a concise explanation of what my steps are going to be. So first it's the center line, then it's the axes of the eyes, the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, and then I'm going to start to put in a few small shapes to represent each of the features with no more than just a couple straight lines and angles. And then you'll see later on that I end up having to wipe this off because I periodically will stand back and then try to reason with the shapes, see if the shapes make sense and if they're conveying the image that I want them to convey. And this is one of the more patient parts of the block-in, I will admit, but it's a lot of fun to be able to keep things organized and simplified, and then when you jump into the later stages, you'll see how much taking your time and having patience in this stage really did pay off. Now here I'm going to show you just one of the times where I have the block-in of the face in there, and then I end up having to scratch it out. So here you'll see I'm wiping it out there with my eraser brush. I'm checking my proportions really quickly, and then I'm going to jump right back into where I was. It's kind of a push and pull really, especially when you have so many elements in your composition. So now just going right back in with the eyebrows, the nose, doing the same thing over again. I had to do this a couple times until I got the shapes to a point that I was all right with leaving. And then after this, you'll see that I'll start to put in the little the flowers and things that are in the background. I do like to contrast the abstraction of a two-dimensional image that you'll see in the background right about now with the more three-dimensional looking things that we'll have in the foreground. And at the first day, I was really nervous about this project. I started this project on a Wednesday, and this needed to be uploaded by Saturday. So this means that I had Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to work on this painting. This is a 24 by 30 inch cotton canvas. Alright, now that we have the outlines in place, so what I did was, as you saw, block in the figure, figure out the composition, the placement of all of the things in space. But also one thing that I end up doing that I don't really talk about too much in my usual painting videos is I look for distortion in my photo references. The femur bone, I think, was pretty distorted in the photo reference, so I actually overcompensated. Looking at it, I knew that the femur, so the legs, would be a little larger, just because of the camera angle. You know, the camera tends to make things closer to you bigger, but it exaggerates it a little bit. So I actually ended up having to make it longer to try to kind of get closer to what it would look like in nature. So now I'm just gonna let this dry overnight. So the next day I'll come back and then I'll start to basically attack the painting alla prima, looking for specific areas of interest. And again, this is how I've been working in the studio these days. This is my preferred approach. This is a combination basically of the classical approach and the alla prima approach. So overnight this should dry, this should be touch dry and ready for the next layer. And here we are on the second day. On the second day, I was really nervous, because in the second day, that's when I was going to attack the painting, basically alla prima. And if you're new to this, alla prima means wet on wet. In contrast to classical painting, alla prima is much more difficult, I think, personally. It's much more demanding because you're doing a lot of things at once. You're balancing shape, value, and color pretty much all at once. So see how I'm kind of running my hands through it, and nothing is coming off. So it seems to have worked even in this area where I painted more thick. So this is why I like to draw with the burnt umber and then just thin it out with the mineral spirits, because pretty much the next day it's completely touch dry and ready for the next layer. So for the colors, I actually have quite a number of colors here on the palette. And if you would like to know exactly what colors I'm using, please feel free to see the description box down below where they will be typed out for you. And this is because after I was done filming yesterday, I returned to my studio work. So I had loaded up the palette with color. I let the colors kind of dry on the corners here, and then with the palette knife I kind of just scraped them off and blend them into the surface to create this kind of color effect, which I actually really enjoy. I think palettes are pretty neat. They are a form of art in and of themselves. So I'm going to start off pretty much alla prima, so I tend to just pick a plane, any plane, and you'll see the photo reference in the top left corner of your screen throughout some of the painting footage, though, just for the camera angles and the cinematography and all that stuff. I may not be able to have it in every single shot, so leaving the colors out on the palette overnight over top of this dry oil paint actually kind of soaks up some of the excess oil from the oil paint, and it's something I actually like. It makes the paint feel much thicker. So I'm just mixing up a little bit of the nickel yellow, cadmium yellow, flake white. And like I said, I'm going to go into the voiceover mode at some point soon. I'll know in the editor when it's time to switch over to voiceover. So I'll talk to you a little bit as I put these planes. The important thing right now is to assess the value. So I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna. That was actually Venetian red. Now to make a darker, so burnt sienna, cadmium green. Burnt sienna, cadmium green, the nickel yellow. So now as I walk my way down towards the nasal bone, it's going to get a little bit darker. Okay. So now is the time to do all of the heavy lifting in this portrait painting. So it's going to now be down to the basic planes. So I'm going to be subdividing large planes into smaller planes, as you're seeing in this footage here. You get to see how I actually move around about the studio, standing back and forth and trying to get as much perspective as possible. Now the important thing really is to look at these large shapes. Now as you see how very quickly the footage is going through all of the decisions that I'm making, I'm very much trying to attack the painting basically one shape at a time, one
plane at a time, relating each shape to one another. Each brushstroke, as you're seeing here, has a significance. It has a purpose. And by relating brushstrokes to one another, as you're seeing here, you're really getting a sense of the entire picture. Standing back, trying to keep your shapes as simple as possible is going to be key. And then meshing those shapes into one another, not necessarily blending them into one another, but getting them to fit with each other such that there's a seamless flow between the shapes is something that you can achieve with this technique, though it is a little bit more complicated, I'll say, than a classical approach. This, remember, alla prima means wet on wet, and this approach really, it boils portrait painting down to its essence, which is what is the most I can say with the least amount of brush strokes.
Now, going into the face, looking for those major planes, subdividing first the the glabella from the top plane of the nasal bone, and then going into the zygomatic bone, the eye sockets, and all of those features. Going into it with color, I'm really looking at it one shape at a time, comparing each individual shape of value and color to one another, and in this way you can be really fast and go in and say what you want to say much faster. This approach is what allowed me to complete this painting in such a short period of time.
So the time is now 4:08 on a Thursday, and I'm trying to have this finished and edited by Saturday, so that's going to be kind of interesting. The portrait I painted just the same as with the paint-alongs that you've seen me do. So yesterday I said that I would be kind of attacking the painting alla prima, one area at a time. And I'd like to start off with areas of the most focus. Okay, so the most focus is there on the face, and now I'm actually going to move down towards the neck, the clavicles, the shoulders, and then I'm going to move into the arms. So it's kind of in the order of importance, with I guess the background being the last thing. So when we get into the background, I have a little trick for how I'm going to layer the color without losing the drawing that I put in before. So now what I'm going to do is just get into the, like I said, the shoulders, the arms, the hands, the still life. Nope, on this day I actually did not make it to the still life object. All of that stuff, and then hopefully by tomorrow I'll be finishing this up with the background, but of course this is all going to be in one video. Now, one of the most important things in a technical level is to have a mastery of your materials. So I choose to use Winsor Newton, a combination of Winsor. I like to use a Williamsburg for my flake white, and then some of the Gamblin colors in between. And again, I'll have a list in the description box down below so you can see exactly what colors I'm using. Now, as I'm moving my way down towards the clavicles, I'm trying to keep the shapes a little more simplified, a little more calm near the clavicles. The clavicles are just one area that can be overdone very easily. So what I'm going to do is compress the value range, and compressing the value range will make these shapes appear less sharp, less kind of unpleasing to the eye. So specifically with a kind of graceful pose like this, I wouldn't want to ruin it by overdoing any of the shapes in the clavicles. So this little area right there, that's the suprasternal notch. So as I place down that shape, I want to make sure that it is the light most facing plane. Now you see, as I'm standing back making these large decisions in my mind, every shape really is a big decision when you're painting in alla prima, which is also quite a lot of fun.
Now, as I start to paint in the hands, the most important thing really is the thumb and getting the thumb to fit within the parameters of the palm. If you can get a decent thumb shape within the hand, then you can avoid that kind of awful claw-looking shape that can happen with hands. Though, to be honest, I kind of struggled with that hand. I don't think I ever actually went past that stage. And now you see that I painted the other hand, very quickly. As I said, I don't want to make this video too long. I want it to be more cinematographic, so not showing things that are mundane is what I'm trying to do. But in any case, the dress now, it's a little bit of yellow ochre, titanium white, and I did thin out the paint a little bit with the odorless mineral spirits. And just like with the clavicles, I did not want the shirt to be too jarring. I didn't want any of the shapes to be too sharp or too I just didn't want them to stick out too much, basically. Now you're seeing my little container of my odorless mineral spirits, a little close up there, thinning out the paint on this brush. It is a combination of burnt umber, ivory black, and alizarin crimson permanent. And so what I'm doing now is just blocking in the rest of the dark shapes surrounding the background. At this point, I was fairly tired. There was quite, I painted for several hours on this particular day. So at this point, I was kind of getting extremely tired. So what I wanted to do was say what I wanted to say for the bottom half of the background, so that the next day I'll be able to go back in and finish off the painting by completing the top portion of the background. As you're seeing here, the brushstrokes are going to be fairly loose, fairly simplified, though there's going to be a consideration for the large value relationships, placing in these large broad brushstrokes. Now you see how it reads fairly well at a distance. Now what I'm going to do is start to put in a few little details for the chair. I don't like to say the word detail. The word detail makes me cringe. But what I'm going to do is thin out a little small synthetic brush with the odorless mineral spirits, and then apply a little bit of the middle range of the colors, using a little bit of cadmium green there into the middle tones. Just a few tiny brush strokes ought to do it for these shapes. And here we are on the next day. First thing to do is get all the materials ready for battle. Now remember earlier I said I had a little trick for painting the background without losing the initial outlines that we created on the first day for those more decorative elements. I'm going to show you how I do that now. So first I need to mix up the colors that I want. I used a little bit of cadmium green, burnt umber, and nickel yellow. Okay. And I thinned out the paint a little bit, so the application of paint is a little bit thin. Now can you see that the initial lines are still showing through? I chose this color. I edited what I had before. There I am kind of thinning out the colors. I chose this color because I kind of wanted a contrast between the more like warm tones, but I didn't want something to be so cold or gray, so that's why I used a little bit of the cadmium green into the background. And with a little bit of black and white and a tiny bit of the alizarin, here I'm painting in the little spot that I missed yesterday. I missed a little dark shadow underneath of the fabric of the model's clothing. Here is the Neo McGilp, and now it's time to start using medium. And this medium is going to help me to layer on the darker, more greenish tones onto the outlines, the initial outlines for the decorative parts of the background that we painted in previously. So as the lines, and I'm just trying to keep a kind of simplified brushstroke. I know I say the word simplified a lot, but I just want it to be very simple, two-dimensional, and so this two-dimensional abstraction should complement the more three-dimensional rendition of the figure in the foreground of this image. And by this point, it pretty much was just down to filling in the background. But I wanted to have some of the brushstrokes show through. See how it's kind of not completely opaque. So each of these colors that I'm laying on shows some brushiness, some brushstrokes to them. And that's actually a quality of oil painting that I enjoy. I like being able to see through individual layers, especially when you're using, layers of different colors. It does create some very nice effects. And now I'm going to mix up a little bit of the Dioxazine purple, ivory black, a little bit of the Neo McGilt medium, and I'm going to start to paint in the still life element of this composition. And there we have the candle. I really did enjoy painting the candle. Now you see me in contemplation. I took a huge risk at this stage of the painting. I knew that the darks in the hair and on the flesh tones from the day before had settled in. Now as you see, I'm starting to layer this in. I do not recommend this if your painting is only a day old. This was a big risk to put in the Neo McGilt, but I knew I wanted to photograph the painting, so this helped bring back the original values. And now for a final touch, I'm just going to use this color that I mixed up and soften some of the edges around the hair. I did choose to make it a little bit warmer just to add a little touch of hue variation to the corner of the dark shape of the hair. And there you have it. There is the story of the beauty of abstraction. Again, a 24 by 30 inch original oil painting executed from a Wednesday to a Friday and edited to feature on a Saturday episode. It was quite a roller coaster to create this painting within these days, and then all the hours put into editing this video. Yes, it is a much shorter video, but every second of this video, I've looked over every second of this video, did the best that I could with the editing to provide a much more kind of like a Netflix TV show or a Netflix series type of episode that features this type of art, and I want to highlight this type of art because it is so endearing to me. It's something that I truly love, and I want to share that experience with the world. So hopefully you enjoyed this more cinematographic type of episode, kind of documentary type of episode of the genesis of an oil painting. What I want is to have my show, my own show. You know how Bob Ross had the Joy of Painting, you know, a type of show. I don't know the name of the show. If you have an idea for me of what I should name this show, please write it down in the comments down below. I want to have an idea, like the title of the show / the title of the painting, okay? And I'll be guiding you through just like I did. Hopefully in the future I'll be able to have better camera angles and things like that. But title of the show / the title of the painting, and then I guide you through an entire painting in this kind of much more streamlined, compressed type of video that combines both cinematography, painting, education, and a little bit of entertainment, hopefully, to you. That being said, please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you are not subscribed. Please share this video as much as you can. It will really help me out. I really want to share this message of you know, classical oil painting, classical realism in the modern world, and that it's still very important to us. I want to share that with the entire world. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next episode.